Gotta love the technical challenges. All right, welcome to the channel. Sorry, got a little tongue-tied there. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name's David, and I figured today that we would go through my process to conceptualizing, designing, and creating large-scale mocks. Mocks, of course, which stand for my own creation out of Lego. So again, if it's your first time joining in, thanks for joining. And if you've been to my channel before, you kind of have an idea as to things I like to build, pop culture especially, and anything Lord of the Rings or comics related. But let me know where you're joining us from and what your favorite Lego is, okay? So, in this series here, I'm going to be working on a mock of Helm's Deep, which, for those who may not know, is a fortress in the Lord of the Rings, which is the site of a very epic battle between Kingdom of Rohan and an army of, in the movie, Uruk-hai, or in the books, Army of Orcs. Cinematically, in the movies, it's, I think, the best medieval battle ever put to screen. So if you agree, you know, give us a thumbs up on that. If there's a battle you prefer that's better, let me know, and maybe we can talk about that. So again, going back to this whole video series, I'm going to be going through my whole process. This will be a 5-month-long race to the finish to see if I can complete this mock before a local convention in August. So what I'm going to get out of it is I will be getting this build done, and you guys will get to see the ins and outs of how we go through designing something like this and how you can start doing mocks of your own. So if you're a new builder, you can we're going to share some of the tips and tricks to the whole process. If you're a seasoned veteran builder, maybe there's something you can add to your toolbox. So in any case, let's get to it. Right now I am working on a cave system, which is going to be supporting the inner, basically the inner fortress, which is going to rest on top. I choose to do caves because it looks a little bit nicer than just having scaffolding. So the drawback, though, is that it does take a bit more time. But again, I go for the looks here. Now, sorry, let me move this here. There we go. So, in any case, in terms of going about designing a mock, so I, for the longest time, didn't really do anything large scale. I'd build a lot on my own, and I'd build Lego sets and do my own things here and there. But I was always afraid to try to do something to display in a convention. And largely a lot of that was because I would see all these amazing builds people would do, and I always thought that, you know, that I maybe might not measure up that way. That can be a really challenging thing to get over sometimes. There's always I think, an inherent need that we have to compare ourselves to other builders in, you know, whether it's in Lego or any other, you know, interest that we might have. We always have a tendency to see something that we like and compare ourselves against that, and it can really be a discouraging thing. First and foremost, I just want to say, you know, comparison is the thief of joy. So wherever your skill level is with Lego, whether you're a beginner, whether you're, again, a seasoned veteran in building mocks, whether you're a master builder, you know, Lego should be fun, and you should build things for yourself. And if somebody likes it, great. If somebody doesn't, you know what? Teach their own. Everyone has things that they like. Everyone has things they don't like. And that doesn't necessarily mean that your mocks may not have value to them, okay? So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Now, how I got over that, I had a friend named Brian who constantly was, giving me the elbow to, get my rear end gear and put something out. And, that really helped me to just forget what I was worrying about to what other people might be thinking. And I was able to just jump into creating a mock, and I've kind of been hooked on that since. So part of the reason I want to do this is to, maybe give you guys some insight as to, how you can get started on doing, your own things and whatnot. But in any case, I am rambling. So I've kind of decided to go over a few different topics throughout this whole video. And yeah, sorry, got a little tongue-tied. That might happen more than once. Sorry, technical difficulties. You gotta love it when you haven't signed in to chat with viewers. If you have any reviews on the video, you can, not make a joke about how I wasn't prepared for this part. But, blah, blah, blah. Well, the chat feature is not really allowing me to sign in for the moment. So I can view. I may not chat directly, or it may be a little bit of a lag. But in any case, we'll just move on. So I guess to start off, when, if you have decided to build a mock, it can sometimes feel a bit daunting, especially if you're doing something really large scale. There's a couple of ways that you can, kind of get around that. What I mean by that is get around the apprehension behind doing something really big or whatnot. And the best thing to do is really to start with a clear idea. Now, what that means is that you want to find an idea that resonates with you. Because if you have a really strong vision for your build, it's going to translate into the build. No matter where your building skill is at, that's going to translate. So in the case of, for example, if you're a Star Wars fan and you want to do something Star Wars themed, decide what do I want to do? Do I want to do a battle? If so, what is the battle about? Give it some story that you can build into it, and that will help anybody that views your mock to understand what you were trying to get at, and that's honestly like something that I find a lot of builders, I'll be fair, I won't say lack, but I feel that can be a bit of a pitfall. A lot of times we'll decide, I want to do this, I want to make this, but then there's no clear idea, and it can end up being a little bit hard to read sometimes. That's a very common thing to happen in like medieval battles or like medieval scenes. And if you want people to enjoy your stuff or whatnot, it just really helps to make sure you have that idea established. Now, how I usually do it is I will make a list of anything that comes to mind, anything and everything. At the very beginning, nothing is a bad idea. So that often means that I have a notebook like this, and I will just fill it with whatever comes to mind, and I mean, even if it seems like a stupid thing, I'll write it down. And that whole thing is not really, the process is just to get your mind engaged and just get the gears turning. At this point, we're not really trying to edit our ideas. We just want our brain to come up with something. And I usually find, at least for me, and this might differ person to person, but I find that my best ideas usually start popping up after I've written down about 20. The easy ones can sometimes seem like, you might get one idea that you're like, oh, this is great. But sometimes that's a bit what you might consider to be low-hanging fruit. And if you keep pushing your brain to come up with stuff, even after you think you've exhausted, your creative batteries, then you'd be surprised what things you can come up with. That was actually something that I learned from a professor in college. I was in a storyboarding class. For those who don't know, I'm a professional animator. And when I was studying storyboarding, this professor, he really tried to emphasize that we needed to, exercise our creative muscles, and that often meant pushing yourself past what was the easy choice on something. And whenever we would be boarding like an idea, he'd have us come up with a full list of things, and then take that list, toss it aside, and then come up with a whole list of other things. And some of my best ideas came from, the second or third sheet of paper and whatnot. And the same thing could happen with your Lego builds. Oh, hello, Nicholas Frolette. I hope I pronounced that right. Welcome to the stream. Where was I at? Oh, as far as the getting the ideas out. So in that case, it was really kind of funny because on like I think it was my third page, I came up with the idea of a short about a cat working as a security guard at an aquarium overnight, and that ended up becoming the basis for a short film that I ended up doing in college that ended up getting into a couple of film festivals, which was funny. Which again, had I gone with the easy option, I wouldn't have had that idea. Now, in terms of like Lego builds, I often find that I generally tend to write castle stuff down first, because that's pretty much my favorite thing to build, are castle scenes. But then sometimes, as the more I go, then you find that you might have more specific ideas. So yeah, give yourself as many options as possible, and then narrow down. So now once you've decided on something, that's where you want to start collecting reference of any type. If you're doing a castle, find imagery on architecture, find images on like the layout of a castle. If you want to build something that's more fantasy themed, then look at fantasy art, or if you're doing something more realistic, even look at photos of actual castles and decide what aesthetic you want to go for. So I will usually, when I'm designing a building or even a smaller mock, I'll get as many pictures as I can and try to give myself the best possible idea of the scene that I'm establishing. One example that I did of a mock a few years back was I did like a watchtower, and I decided I didn't want to go with a typical light bluish gray or dark gray castle. I wanted something that looked different and stood out, so I decided to do something that was more Mediterranean in style. And one thing that I find helps really well, especially when it comes to castles, is oh, hey, the Naturator, welcome. So, there's a game I played called Age of Empires 2. Came out, gosh, when I was a kid. And me and my brothers started playing that during the pandemic. And they have tons of really cool designs for all these different types of buildings. And I found one that was a Sicilian watchtower. And it had, you know, a lot of really great detail to it. And I was able to use that as a reference for this watchtower that I wanted to do. And one of the features of it was like it had some cracked plastering over brick, which I thought was just such a cool feature to it. And that ended up really selling the build, at least for me, and I think for a few other people. So yeah, it was just give yourself as much reference as you can and find ways to I guess borrow what you can from stuff you find around you and put it into your builds. So yeah. Another thing that really helps too, if you're into building like figures or whatnot, is to find like statues that you like. For me, one of the mocks that I did a while back was this one here, of the hobbits hiding from the Nazgul. That I heavily was influenced by a Weta statue of the same scene, and it really helped me to establish basically the setting of it, as well as the placement of all the different items in it. Sorry, drink break. But yeah, so again, get as much reference as you can, and you know, highlight the things you like, and then go from there. And once you've collected enough reference, then you want to start kind of building like a rough idea of your mock. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to start right away with bricks. You can. I usually prefer to sketch things out. It's a great idea to carry a sketchbook with you, because you never know when you might have an idea. But I'll usually doodle out certain features, or try to draw out build techniques that I think would be beneficial for that. Because you never know when you might get a really, really good idea. So it helps to be able to visualize that. And that's at least a system that's worked for me. Some people prefer, building digitally, and that's great. There's a lot of advantages to doing that. Just whatever helps you to get your ideas out as quick as you can, because you never know when you might have a really great idea and then it decides to, fly the coop on you. At least that's how my brain works. I swear my wife probably gets tired of me, being up until like 2 in the morning, but sometimes that's when your brain decides, you know what, it is time to Lego. So, yeah. But, yeah. So, quick question for you all. For those who have joined the channel, what was your first introduction to Lego? Or what was your favorite Lego set growing up? Whatever you want to go. Me personally, there were 2 sets when I was a kid that really stood out. One was one called the Knight Stronghold, which was a Black Falcon set. Had a small little keep with some Dragon Knights, and then it had a Black Falcon knight with a breastplate and helm that had a visor. And that thing, yeah, I still have that fig, but that was super cool. That's the set that sold me on Lego Castle. The other set that was really sold Lego for me was one called the Midnight Transport, and it was a city set that had 3 vehicles, a van, a helicopter, and a jet. And they were all black and red in their motif, and it was like, I don't even remember what the idea behind the set was. In retrospect, it was probably people like smuggling something, but I just remember I loved that set. I got that for my birthday one year when we went to Arizona to visit some family, and my parents made me think that that they had forgotten my birthday, and I was like, oh, I'm so bummed. And then they were like, by the way, Lego, and I'm like, okay, cool, we'll forget everything. And yeah, I was sold. But yeah. Oh, let's see. Mayday 4954. You like the old Ninjago sets? Solid. Ninjago is great. Yeah. Love Ninjago. Problem is that there's so many now that it's hard to keep up with buying all of them. I mean, that could be said for any of Lego's themes, I guess. Let's see. Ladybug Princess 1, welcome to the stream. You love the space with the green clear piece. Oh, the Blacktron 2. Or Mtron, I guess. So, yeah, those were great. I was a big fan of Blacktron. So, but yeah. You know, it's funny, going back to the topic about that Midnight Transport. I remember that was like my favorite set to play with, and then my younger brother accidentally left one of the figs on a light bulb, and we didn't know, and then the light bulb got turned on. It was on a lamp. It sounds weird, and then it melted, and yeah, he felt so bad, and I felt so bad, but such is life, right? Crazy. Now here, as I've been talking, I've been building these little bits of slope that I can add onto my little rock wall here. It's a lot of tedious work, so I figure I'll just do that while we chat about all this. Now going back to our idea of establishing a rough draft of your build. Now, if you, like I mentioned, if you are the type that likes to draw, that's great. You don't need to have anything that's like really super detailed. I mean, we're not asking for, you know, Leonardo da Vinci level sketches or anything like that. Really, you want to just, it's more about blocking in shapes and establishing a layout for your build. Okay. That's one thing that I also learned when I was storyboarding, is to just come up with, you know, kind of start rough and then refine the details later. So in this case, if I'm doing Helm's Deep, you know, you could then start off establishing, you know, where you want your fortress to go, and where you want certain features, and where you want the rocks and everything like that. So it can really be something as simple as that. It doesn't need to be, again, some sort of masterpiece or whatnot. The details will come in later as you continue to work on it. And another thing that is about is just establishing the focal points of your build. With any sort of mock that you're doing, especially if you're doing something that's based on, like, you know, a story idea or whatnot, you want, you know, 1 or 2 focal points that will really draw the audience's attention, right? So, case in point, suppose you're doing, you know, I mean, I hate to go all meta and talk about my own stuff, but if, you know, in this case, we're building Helm's Deep, right? So the focal point, you know, in this large, massive battle isn't necessarily always going to be like the huge castle or the huge, you know, army or whatnot. You want it to be on your heroes, right? So where Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli during this? Where's Gandalf? You know, and if you decide where those focal points are going to be in your mock, then you can craft attention around that, and that will really help to sell the build as well. Like in this case, this build is going to be a bit different from most that I do, because The plan is to actually have it change day to day. The convention that I typically participate in every year is called Brick Slopes. So it's hosted by, it's hosted by the local lug here. Really great event. If you have not been and you live in Utah, you should go. Or if you're visiting, you know what? They had people come from Germany, I think, last time. So yeah, totally check it out. But yeah, I didn't even talk today. So it's generally a 3-day event, and the idea is to start out day 1 with Helm's Deep in like the early stages of the battle. So the Uruk-hai are attacking, and the wall is intact, yada yada. Day 2, the wall will be breached, and then day 3, Gandalf will be on the ridge with the Rohirrim. So with each of those, the focal point is going to change day to day. It's kind of an ambitious thing. It might be a really dumb decision to try to do, but that's the plan. So, sorry, need to get more cheese slopes. Where do I have those? Over here. So yeah. Now, one thing you can do to kind of help yourself identify where you should put those focal points, if you're familiar with photography, you can use some of the, behind, photographic composition. I often tend to work off of the rule of thirds with respect to like storyboarding, meaning that if you take your entire image, divide it vertically into thirds and horizontally into thirds, and your focal point should be on the intersections of those lines somewhere. So if we want to look at if you want to look at the Hobbits, for example, you have the horizon level on 1/3. You've got the head of the horse on another third. On 1/3 here is the tree. On the other third is the head of the horse in the Nazgul. So your attention gets drawn to those ideas, primarily here. Okay. So that can be a real good way to understand how you should place your focal points, right? And sometimes, that might change. You can, especially if you're doing like an art piece or something like that, you may want to have something that is straightforward. There's nothing wrong with that. But more the point is that you want to have clear focal points that will draw the viewer's attention to one specific area in the build. And then from there, they can look around. If you have tons of different focal points, it can oftentimes feel a little overwhelming or unclear, And that's honestly a really common thing that I find in a lot of medieval builds. There's often, which, is understandable when you have, 500 minifigs laid out all over the, the build. It can be really easy to lose that focus. But, well, awesome, cool. I'm Naturator. I'm really hoping it works out. If, fingers crossed. This is, again, probably the most ambitious build that I'll have done. The last time I did a castle in similar scale was 3 years ago, and it took me 10 months to execute. So I've got half the time for a build that is close to twice the size. Oh, and there I go, losing some parts. So yeah, if I can execute it, it'll be awesome. I very well just might end up losing a ton of sleep between now and then. But, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And as Bruce Lee said, even, that, well, this is paraphrasing, but failure is not, it's not the problem, it's low aim. in great things, it's glorious even to fail. And again, that's a horrible paraphrasing of that quote, but yeah. Yes, mocks usually do more. I mean, it's funny because, you know, everybody I know that builds mocks, you know, you always talk to them after the fact, and you're like, "Oh, this is amazing," and they're like, "Yeah, this isn't how I planned it would turn out." And I think every Lego builder, to a certain degree, we have this, you know, this expectation of what we want to accomplish, and then reality sets in, and we're like, "I can't do this." It's like I've got to amend the goal, so, which is something that you have to do every now and then. So, I find it's really common with like castle builders and pirate builders and Star Wars builders. Yeah, we always have this super, you know, inflated idea of here's what I'm gonna do, and then by the time, you know, you get to convention time, it's like, okay, here's what I was able to do. Oh well, but yeah, alas. Pardon. Now, after you've had your rough draft set up, at that point you want to start designing things out. Okay. Now that you can do several different ways. I know a lot of people that like to tackle it in a digital designer like Studio, or in a CAD program. Some people just like diving into a tub of brick, and you know, neither one is better than the other. I find personally that there's pros and cons to each. I myself, I generally like to build first and then amend things digitally if I have to. The reason I like that is because there are sometimes, well, two reasons. Sometimes you find there are certain aesthetics that you can work out a lot easier just building parts together than you could trying to do it digitally. Sorry, have some hiccups there. I didn't even talk today. The other thing is that if you build physically, you know what parts you have available. It can be very easy when you build in a digital program to build something enormous and then quickly realize I have none of these parts. With Helm's Deep, I actually built the fortress digitally first. And actually, let me see if I can show that to you. Well, let's see. Hang on one second. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So this is part of the keep. And sorry, let me go back. And so I ended up designing that out first. And it was really nice because, you know, I was able to get the look exactly the way I wanted it to and everything. But then I quickly realized that, one, I had a fraction of those pieces, and two, that I had to go back over it and edit out parts that didn't come in the colors that I had set up. So, yeah, that's kind of one of the drawbacks there. One of the biggest advantages of doing it digitally is that you have, you know, a blueprint pretty much set up, and you can always revisit that if you can't remember how something went together. And also, it can be a great way to set up parts lists that you need to order and whatnot. So, yeah, again, pros and cons to doing it either way. But, again, with the main focus of that, of getting your, you know, of starting your building, is really just to, yeah, I can't even talk. Is to kind of get yourself familiarized with the parts combinations you want to use. Like if you want to create a certain look, then Oh boy. So, it's all right. You gotta love it when you don't click out of that. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that's better. Sorry, my apologies. But now I lost my train of thought. No, so yeah, if you're doing something that you want to establish just a very specific look for, then just getting into the building is giving yourself a chance to get those parts combinations worked out, figure out what pieces you might need. Yeah, sorry about that. I realized that a bit too, a bit later than I should have. So, but yeah, hopefully it's working now. But what was I going to say? So, case in point, bear with me one moment. I will go grab something to show. All right. So this here is something is kind of a work in progress. This is my attempt at a steward construct from Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Now, with him, I largely just dove into it trying to see what pieces I would need to build this mouth. All right. And a lot of it was just, okay, how do I create this shape? And so for the first 3 hours was just assembling parts and arranging them in different ways, trying to figure out what the best structure would be for that. So you want to get that, you want to do that really early on in your build process, mostly because you just want to get the mistakes out of the way. Kind of going back to when I was in college, my storyboarding professor called it failing faster. You want to figure out what works early and what doesn't work, and then that way you can avoid a lot of these pitfalls later on when you've got a ginormous build and then you realize, oh darn, this doesn't work. So yeah, you want to be able to make those mistakes early, because failure is oftentimes the best teacher. So yeah. Oh, let's see. So, with Helm's Deep, that's an excellent question, Naterator. So with the coloring on that, in the digital file, I just stuck with light bluish gray. However, as for those who know, that is never available at LEGO stores. It's actually the plan is to do it in a few different colors, because, well, for a number of reasons. But so most will be light bluish gray, but there will be some portions that are going to have dark gray, some that are going to have olive green. The idea is to color it in a way that it's going to make it look a little bit more lived in. So areas of the fortress that are older or might be more prone to, for example, near the culvert where the water flows out. Areas around that are going to be darker colors, might have a little more earthy tones to them, so it looks like, oh, this has been here so long, there is moss accumulating here. Or inside the keep, where you might be more prone to moisture accumulating, you might have a darker gray. So it won't be one solid color. We're going to try to use the pieces in a way that it makes it look older, makes it look more lived in. And then also along areas like the deepening wall, or the curved wall of the keep, trying to speckle in a few other dark tan, dark bluish gray, sand blue, just so we can see, okay, this is what happens when they have to repair part of the fortress or something. So the coloring is largely going to be determined by what I have on hand, and then also what colors are going to make it, give it that, again, that look that is an actual lived in place. So we'll see how it goes. It might change, but that is how things go. But yeah. Snack time. Sorry. Talking about Lego is such a tiring experience. It's, and it's a hungry experience. But what do? You just have to get tacos later. But, let's see. When I build in the program, do I design usually in the color of the build? Not always. I really should. Because, as most of you know, they don't make every single Lego piece in every single color. So, yeah, there can be a bit of a hazard to just building freely in white, because the computer will be like, oh yeah, sure. I mean, you can set it to where it will only show you pieces available in specific colors, but I usually will, after the fact, go and color things, and if it doesn't work, then I'll be like, oh darn, that was a bad idea, let's fix it. So yeah, I guess the answer to that is sometimes I do, sometimes I really don't. So yeah, hard to say. Sorry, got a little tongue-tied. It's a common occurrence. It's one of the drawbacks to having ADHD. Sometimes you have ideas you want to get out and you can't really vocalize them because your brain's working on several other things at the same time, and then you're just like, okay. But yeah. Another thing as far as the whole build process goes, at this point, at least when I'm starting to work on a build, and I might have what you could consider a bit of a backward approach to it, because I will often decide on, again, going back to those focal points, I'll work outward from the focal point. So, for example, we'll go back to our Hobbit build over here, if everyone can see. So when I started on this, the first thing that I went for was the horse. I thought that would be the thing that most people would look at, so I decided I'm going to tackle this thing first. And a lot of it boiled down to defining the shape and size of the muzzle of the horse, and then working outward from there. And that's kind of what I do with all of my mocks. I'll figure what feature, like find a part that really, really defines a specific feature of the build, and then I'll work out from there. Actually, let me go grab another example build to show you. All right, be right back. Okay, sorry for the delay here. So this is a build I did last year, and when I was working to tackle Tinkerbell here, the entire build was determined off of this piece here, this little round ball that made the little pom-pom on her shoe. Now from there, I basically was able to, I basically decided, okay, this piece is going to be for this, so how big in relationship to that part is the rest of her foot? Once I had the foot, then it's like, okay, now how big compared to her foot is the calf? And then I was able to sketch it out from there. And then eventually, worked my way up until, she was completed. So, yeah, if you're doing a character, or honestly any sort of build, decide what, how you want to display your focal point. And if there's a part or arrangement of pieces that really, really fit that well, use that to determine your proportion for things, and then work out from there. When it came to Helm's Deep, okay, I'm gonna go put her away and I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. So when it came to determining the size for Helm's Deep, I decided I wanted it to be minifig scale. So what I ended up doing was I looked for reference imagery to figure, okay, how can I determine what is what's a good scale for this, right? And the thing that actually helped me was an image that I found. I actually found it on ArtStation from someone who had been designing Helm's Deep digitally, and he had an image of the gate with 2 soldiers right next to it. So from there I knew, okay, this is how big a minifigure should be in relationship to that gate, width-wise and height-wise. And so I started with the gate, designed that out, and then I was able to work outwards from there and built the gatehouse, and then started working on the wall, etc., etc. Okay, so that can be a really helpful, I guess, trick to go off of when you're building something really big. Is just, again, start with one specific feature that you want to be your focal point. Get that established really well in terms of scale and the parts you want to use, and then from there expand out from that. You know, I think a lot of times, especially in these larger builds, it can become really easy to get discouraged or overwhelmed just by the sheer scale of it. So it's best to just look at it and break it down into smaller chunks that are easier to swallow. So, yep. But on that question, for those watching, what is your favorite scale to build in? Do you prefer minifig scale? Do you prefer like brick built figure scale, or do you prefer micro scale? And why? I mean, you don't have to say why if you don't want to, but what do you think? See, for me, it's a mix of them, because I think when I'm building characters, I mean, I like to go a bit bigger, just because I can get a bit more detail in them. Like with my Dr. Doom over here, I'm going to move Link so you can maybe get a bit better view. Move my line out. But his little knee armor, that's something I could not do if I were building him in a scale similar to Link. However, and this is just my personal opinion, I do feel that if people can execute microscale really, really well, that is the most impressive thing in the world to me. Because it's one thing to be able to build something super enormous and have a ton of detail. It's another thing to build something this big and maintain that same level of detail. People that do the architecture sets, I swear, sometimes I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me. So, let's see. Yeah, the other advantage to the micro scale stuff is that it doesn't take nearly as much shelf space. So, I mean, unless you're getting some of the more recent like architecture stuff like the Notre Dame or the Sagrada Familia, but yeah, or the Eiffel Tower. But then you just, rationalize away, the use of your kitchen table. It's not for dinner, it's for holding the Lego, right? Right. Fight. Kitchen. Pork rind. Sorry, that was maybe a bit of a tangent. For any of you who have seen the original Ninja Turtles movie, that was a quote from that. So, yeah, lives rent free in my head. Now, as far as going back with your build and whatnot, it's also in the initial stages, it's a good idea to start experimenting with establishing contrast. Now, what that means is you want to layer in things that are different. That can help to draw your attention. So that can be done in a number of different ways. You can establish contrast through different shapes, through different sizes, textures, color, and even space. For example, I didn't even talk today. Real great thing to do with castles. If you're going to have, a castle that looks very solid and very square-like often, a great way to contrast that is give yourself some sort of forest nearby. Contrast the rigid shape with something organic. Or in terms of size, again, if we go back to the hobbits, you have this towering Nazgul over these tiny hobbits. That's a real good use, a real good way to differentiate and to establish some focus. Oh, let's see. Minifig scale, yep. That is so true. Yeah, I mean, minifig scale can definitely be tough. And there are some times where I mean, I feel like you have to take some liberties. I was having a problem with trying to build a Lionel in scale with a minifig, because I'm working my way through some Zelda enemies and bosses, and I was trying to build a Lionel from Breath of the Wild, this was my attempt here. And in the game, Link is about half the height, which unfortunately, I ended up having to make him a little bit bigger, just due to the parts constraints and everything like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that just goes back to my opinion that this building detail smaller, I feel, is just a way harder thing than building detail in something really, really big. But again, to each their own. So, yes, pork rind. Character builds are fun too, though. Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I feel just, that's one thing I love about Legos. There's something for everybody. I mean, you can build in so many different ways, and there's really not a wrong way to do it. I mean, I think even some of my favorite builds that I've seen at conventions have been people that have built stuff in Duplo. And it's amazing how well some of those builds can be done in bricks that are like chunky, Let's see. Daybreaker Cole, hey, welcome to the channel. Oh, hey, thank you, much appreciated. So I will keep doing this. Yeah, the intent for this whole series is to continue doing these live streams and talk about building. You might see me do more actual building. Other times it's just talking about the approach behind it all. But no, I appreciate you watching. We'll be doing these every Saturday, same time, same place. Yeah, got a little tongue-tied there. What's new though, right? But going back to contrast, so when building contrast, again, you can do size, you can do shape, texture, as I think probably my personal favorite, because you can really change stuff up just depending on the type of bricks you use. A really great way to do that is going from smooth, like, to something that is more agreeable. Like Star Wars ships are a phenomenal example of that, where you can have a ship that looks like, yeah, we had a panel here, but to fit this we had to have some piping go up, so that's really good. I also like to do that when it comes to castle stuff. Going back to that, let me actually go grab the remnants of that one watchtower so you can kind of get an idea as to what I was saying. Am I gonna do any full-length videos or of progress updates? Possibly. That is definitely something that I'm looking to do. The logistics behind it just depends. Mainly because I'm in a fairly small build space, so getting you know, the proper like vantage point to view an entire like fortress is going to be a bit difficult. But I will be doing like longer videos where I talk about some of this stuff, and then maybe even do a bit more in depth on how I design certain elements of the fortress. So that is definitely, you know, a possibility. But we're gonna have to see how that goes as the build works, you know, as it progresses. But no, let me go grab that one tower so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, this is what's left of that one watchtower, because, you know, sometimes you have to recycle parts. So a couple of different ways that I establish contrast on this that you can see is primarily color. I'm going to sit down again to do this. So the first thing is color. Half of the build, as you can see, was done in light bluish gray, and then the other half in white with the nougat colored brick. And then on top of that, you've got differences also in the texture on the gray part. We've got some very smooth stuff, and then the brick inside of it. And then also on the white portion, got very smooth areas, and then areas where that plaster has cracked off. So by mixing different types of contrast in, you can really get the look of something that, again, looks like it's lived in. I think that's something that I would love to see more of. And there are a lot of really talented builders that do this. And then there's some that don't do it as much. And I would really love to see more buildings, settings, like castles especially, or pirate ships or whatnot, where it looks like something that has been used or has been lived in. Oftentimes I think the temptation is, especially with castle stuff, to just have a castle that is perfect, and then armies that are perfect, and everything is perfectly aligned, like it's been on display on a shelf. But I'm going to get this out of the way real quick here. Sorry, it was cramping my style. Oh, let's see. But yeah, so yeah, but no, what I was saying is that I feel that sometimes there's almost this desire to have everything look really pristine and really organized and everything like that, and there's not enough attention paid to making it look like it's a real actual space that's used, you know. So yeah, it'd be great to see more of that. So and other ways you can do that, at least in your like castle builds and stuff like that, is give things a purpose, you know. Oh, sorry, gotta put a piece underneath that. Like, for example, if you have, you know, your castle, throw things out in the build, like a bucket here and there. If you have a well, you're gonna need a bucket nearby. If you have, you know, a barracks, give bunks, but then make the bunks not made, you know, like add something to it that just changes it up. Because, you know, perfect, I feel like the need to have like a perfectly arranged build can often work against how realistic it can look. Because let's be honest, life is not perfect. Life is chaos, and I feel that just, you know, makes builds more engaging, personally. Hydration break. But Um, Now, going back to texture, one of the best things you can do to kind of build up your skill with working with textures is to kind of master the use of snot. And that's not as gross as it sounds. For those people who are Lego fans, it means it's an acronym that stands for studs not on top. So learn how to build sideways, upwards, upside down, any way that you can, so that way you can change the direction of your bricks. You can use them in ways aside from the standard system that we see in a lot of the Lego sets. For example, in this little cave system that I'm using snot bricks that allow me to put plates out and build outwards from the sides. That way I can get this curvature on the interior of the cave, and I can also lay down bricks to make a smooth water surface. Okay, that also can give you an insight into building in ways that are really atypical, and sometimes those can be a really good way to catch people's attention. Build in ways that are not normal. Well, normal is kind of an objective word, right? So, okay. But yeah. So for that, honestly, I feel that the best way to do that is just to grab parts and practice just connecting them and seeing what different ways you can do that. I remember I used to work at a Lego store in Orlando, Florida, and one of the things they would teach us is that if you were to take, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong on this, if you were to take 8 2x4 Lego bricks, just standard Lego bricks, 8 of them in varying colors, there are an infinite number of possible combinations to those bricks. So the more you practice just putting bricks together, seeing how they fit, the better your builds are going to become. And one of the things I used to do when I worked at the Lego store is I'd always keep bricks inside my apron. So no matter what I was doing, if I was working at the register, if I was restocking, if I was doing whatever, if there was a slow time, I could just fiddle with bricks, put them together, see how they would match up. And sometimes I came up with some pretty bonkers stuff that really ended up working for a build later on. So, that's just a tip to consider. Worked for me, might work for you. But yeah. Now, this next part I want to talk about is something I feel that every builder should know how to do, and I feel that most builders can struggle with, myself included, and that is knowing how to self-edit. Now, what that means is that it knows when we need to revise an idea or when we need to just abandon it altogether. Okay, and that's not meant to be discouraging. It goes back to that whole fail faster idea, because if we're excited about something, it is so easy to become tunnel visioned and to just see it from one perspective and be like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. But then when you take a step back, you realize you've basically been bragging up, something that isn't as good as it could be, right? This is a concept I got again from when I worked at, when I was studying animation and working on storyboards and whatnot. For those of you who aren't familiar, when you storyboard, you want to get a clear idea out in the sketch, but you do not want to spend hours working on one drawing, because storyboarders will go through hundreds of drawings, and sometimes the story might change and those drawings are out the window. So you just have to really know when you're working, like how to tell when you're working on a good idea or if you're just polishing crap. So, and also just be willing to let some of those ideas go. So you might have a really good idea for something, but it may not work within the larger like vision that you have for a build. And sometimes you may just have to be able to put it aside, save it for another build, or just know, you know what, this isn't going to work at all. Let's just crumple that up and toss it aside, right? But yeah, I mean, that again, I think is just something that a lot of builders could really benefit from. And I am very much like that. I will often get really focused on a certain idea and then follow the rabbit down that hole, only to find that I've wasted, you know, a good while working on something that just wasn't gonna to jive either way. But yeah, let's see if I've missed any comments. Okay, no missed comments so far. Yay, awesome. Now going back to the self-editing thing, this also can be a good when you're editing your ideas. It's also a good idea to revise your build and decide how you can economize on things. Unless you are a Lego master builder or someone with endless income, as I'm sure you guys can imagine, building large-scale mocks can become a bit of a challenge on the pocketbook. So it's a good idea to, I'm going to talk again, to know how you can minimize the amount of parts that you use for a mock. Now, in the case of building digitally, this is an area where I feel that has an advantage over physical building, because it's a really good way to just be able to go back through your design and combine parts using some of the features that they have, and then swapping them out or changing them for other pieces that will look better, or it'll take up fewer parts. Because again, when it boils down to it, if you want to do something really, really big, you got to know where you can kind of stretch your piece availability. When it comes to Helm's Deep, there are definitely certain areas where I've had to go back through it and decide, okay, this is how I built this. Am I really going to use this part, or am I going to substitute something for something else that I have a ton of? Because when it boils down to it, nobody's going to see the interior structure of it. They're only going to see the outside. So is it really going to matter if I'm using a very, very specific piece that costs like 80 cents on Bricklink, or am I going to just use whatever, random junk that I've got, right? For those who have built, mocks before, you know what I'm talking about. But, yep. So, in any case, now, as you go through this whole process of building and revising and editing yourself and all that stuff, it's always a really good idea to start planning your build out in a way that gives you short-term goals, right? Otherwise, it can be very easy to just get caught up in all sorts of other things, and then before you know it, convention time's here and you don't have a build ready, which is kind of what happened to me a couple of years ago. I'd had a plan to do a large-scale castle build, and then I had all sorts of other things that went on, and yeah, by the time the convention came around, I had only a few small things here and there, and a week before, I was like scrambling to come up with something, and I was able to crank out a build of some Muppets, which ended up doing pretty well. I actually really liked him. But the point was that I wasn't focused on. I didn't have a prior plan set up for that build. Didn't have goals that I could meet on it, and so it very quickly spiraled out of control. Kind of again paraphrasing Bruce Lee, is that one of the biggest reasons for failure is a lack of concentration. Okay, so when you plan out your build, make sure you can you want to decide how much time you have to budget for it, how much space you have to work in, and then also planning out, like, how much money you have to put toward it, right? As much as I'm sure most of us Lego fanatics would love to just drop, several thousand on Lego bricks, my wife would probably throw me out of the window if I did that. With good reason if I did, but you want to have a clear plan over, what resources you have to spend towards your mock, and yeah, so, but yeah, there we go. Sorry, getting a little focused on this. Now, another thing that I want to talk about here. Oh, hold on. Missed some comments. Let's see here. Actually, I do have a stockpile of bigs. Now, as much as I would love to say that I have a ton of official Lego figures, the Urukai and the elves are actually going to be like knockoff brand, but I was able to find a good amount. So I've got, gosh, by now I think it's probably close to 900 Urukai, and then a couple hundred elves. I can't remember the exact number. So yeah, there's going to be a good amount. What the exact number is going to be, I don't quite know as of yet, because I have stopped keeping track of them as I order. They're just in a huge bin in another room. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of work putting those all together. But yeah, that'll be fun though. That will be fun. The problem is then, after I've gone and built it, what am I going to do with that many figures, Hard to say. Hard to say. But maybe I'll just have to auction them off or something, or maybe I'll just, I don't know. Maybe we'll have to do a giveaway with some of the Lord of the Rings. Oh, there went another part. Sorry about that. Yeah, maybe we'll just do a giveaway with some of those figures after the fact. But okay, all right. Now, last couple of things to talk about as far as building goes. And this is, I think, again, one of those things that a lot of builders could benefit from learning. I know I myself tend to struggle with this, but is being able to understand when you're, like, the difference between finished and perfect, right? So, and this I think is very prevalent among, like, people that practice any sort of art, is that you have this image of how you want things to work out, right? And you're like, oh, this is gonna be the best thing ever. This is how I want things to go. And sometimes you'll be able to, you'll be able to reach that, and other times you have to be able to realize when something is finished, and when it no longer needs any more tweaking. that can be a really, really difficult thing, because I feel, at least in my case, there's always this desire to have everything perfect or have everything turn out exactly how you had visualized it in your head. And sometimes you'll be able to do that. Sometimes you'll find that that you won't. And that can be a really difficult thing to kind of come to terms with in terms of building. Especially when you're trying to build for like a convention, right? So, and I think the biggest reason why, maybe not the biggest reason, but I think that the most important thing to realize about that is just going back to the whole idea that perfect is overrated, right? And in terms of mocks, you know, you may want everything to be completely in order and completely done this way. Again, kind of revisiting that whole that thought I had about the Lego castle stuff, where oftentimes we'll have every soldier in perfect order, perfect place, and you know, there's just something you can tell about that's off. Like, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy, right? But the movie The Battle of Five Armies is, I think, a very clear indicator of why that doesn't really work. In the original trilogy, you know, particularly like the Battle of Helm's Deep, you know, we do see, you know, huge army against another army, and while there is, you know, a certain degree of order within the Uruk-hai army, they're not always in perfect formation every single time, right? And then when we get to the Hobbit Battle of Five Armies scenes, and you see all these dwarves and all these elves that move in 100%, you know, sync. It's almost like they've been practicing, you know, on Broadway or something. It kind of, at least for me, and, you know, everyone's free to disagree because my opinion is worth about that. It takes a bit of the realism out of it. So why I bring that up is, again, I feel that like when we strive too much for perfection, it can really take you out of the story of the build. It can take you out of the, you know, feeling that it is indeed an actual, like, lived in environment again. I know I've said that a number of times, but I can't stress how at least how I feel, how important it is to make something look authentic, you know. In terms of battles, you know, there was one mock I did where, you know, there was a huge battle taking place, and at the time, you've got one army attacking a castle, and then inside the castle I had all these other soldiers coming out to, like, you know, defend the castle. And I decided, you know what, I'm just not going to have all these guys in full armor and everything, and a lot of them didn't have helmets. There was one guy who was in a minifig that was in boxer shorts, you know, because it was like, what are you going to do when you're attacked all of a sudden? Are you going to be 100% ready? Maybe not, you know. And that was the, you know, the thought process behind that decision. But I feel like a lot of other details in the builds, you know, it can really help to understand that, you know, if you're telling a story through your mock, you know, what are the details of that story and how does that affect, you know, the layout, the design choices, yada yada, right? Like in terms of Helm's Deep, you know, as I'm building this out, one thing that's very clear is that, you know, the Kingdom of Rohan, they were not well equipped, and they weren't planning on battling the Uruk-hai. That was more of a decision of necessity. Their intention was to basically stay there and kind of wait out a siege, you know. And so that's going to affect the decisions that the characters make, and then in the build, that's going to affect how things are arranged, you know, or in any other sort of like castle thing, you know, if you have one army that's attacking, how is that going to affect the decisions that your other army's making, right? So, yeah. Maybe I'm getting a bit too deep into that, but these are the type of things that I think about, you know, at 2 in the morning, you know, when I can't get to sleep. And then the last point that I want to really talk about, in terms of like, you know, my whole approach to building things, and maybe this has been a little bit of a long-winded talk, is after you know, building something, is identify what you learned about it, right? I personally feel that, you know, any sort of situation, you know, it's best to wait a minute, that's gonna be way off. That you should always try to learn from your experiences, right? Sorry, making a mental observation that I had stuff completely off there. But learn what worked, learn, you know, if you learned new building techniques, you know, keep those in mind, things like that, right? So, yeah, if you do a mock, identify what you learned about it during the whole process. If you learned that, you know, a way that you had of building the base for a fortification was just not good because the thing fell apart mid-convention, you know, figure out how to improve on that. If you learned a different way to, you know, to build characters, you know, what did you learn from that, right? I mean, Lego, I think, is unique in that it's, you know, it is probably the best way, you know, best toy for learning. I mean, you know, the whole like slogan of Lego is like learn through play, right? You know, so I mean, that's not the official slogan, but you know, I can't even talk. You know, so just, you know, understand what you learn from the experience, and then how you can, you know, use that as a way to strengthen yourself as a builder, right? And just do that, you know, constantly try to find opportunities to learn new things, to expand your skill set, because no matter how good you are at something, there's always room to learn. You know, even in his late 80s, Michelangelo, you know, the famous sculptor, not the Ninja Turtle, you know, he said he was still learning, even in his 80s, the guy who was perhaps one of the greatest artists of all time, you know. So, yeah. Always find opportunity, or look for things to learn. And then once you have, be willing to share it, you know. Knowledge isn't good if you just keep it to yourself. Nobody wants to be like Brainiac from DC Comics, where you just hoard all the knowledge for yourself, you know. If you know something, you know, share it with somebody else, help them to learn, because, you know, that's how everybody grows, is just by, you know, helping other people out, right? So those are the topics that I wanted to talk about, and again, I feel that those are things that have helped me, you know, to progress to the level where I'm at with building, and I hope that they'll help you in your mock construction. If they have, let me know in the comments on a future video what's worked for you, or if you have a suggestion that I can bring up in a future video to talk about, let me know as well. Again, I want to thank everyone who has tuned into the stream. If it's your first time, again, welcome. And if you've been before, again, welcome. You know, we got space for everybody here at this. At this point, if you guys have any questions, you can throw those out. I will answer just about anything. But then if you did enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. We put out shorts every week of different builds that I'm doing. Right now we're going through all the different bosses from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I also like to do things from all sorts of different types of pop culture, as well as castle. So yeah, if there's something you want to see built in Lego, send me a message. Or if there's a certain build that you want instructions for, also send me a build. I'm more than happy to share those if needed. But yeah, so we'll see if there's anybody that has any questions over the next few, while I try to figure out why these pieces aren't jiving to the system. But yeah. Honestly, it might just be that I'm using these. But it worked last time, so what you gonna do? But let's see here. Nothing so far. Okay. Maybe that will work. Right now, here's another question. If you've been to a Lego convention, whether here in Utah or anywhere else, what were some of your favorite builds that you've seen ever, and why? I think for me, yeah, I didn't even talk. So at the last Lego convention that I was at Brick Slopes 2025, oh, hold on, let me answer. Naturator, yes, I did have to outline things I wanted to talk about. As I kind of mentioned before, I do have ADHD, and sometimes keeping my thoughts organized can be a bit difficult. So I did outline certain things that I wanted to talk about. Unfortunately, you know, sometimes you do veer off on a tangent, as one does. But yeah, I find it helpful to talk about those things, and I do plan to do some videos more in depth on some of those topics, so with probably a bit more visual reference to them. So stay tuned for those. But yeah, good question. What I was saying is that at the last Brick Slopes convention last year that I went to, I think one of my favorite builds was actually done by one of the winners from the most recent season of Lego Masters. And I forget what her Instagram name is, but it's Sage, and she had built like a purse and like makeup accessories that at first glance, like when I was walking by, I really thought it was just a clutch and somebody's makeup on a table. I didn't realize it was Lego, and it made me do a double take. So yeah, that I think was probably one of the most creative things, because you know, when you go to like convention or, you know, Lego conventions, you often see a lot of the same types of builds. You know, I mean, you'll see castles, you'll see pirate ships, you'll see space. You know, it's almost like the original, you know, 4 themes of Lego tend to be the most popular. But the point being is that you often see a lot of the same, and it's really refreshing to me when you can see something that, you know, you would not normally see in Lego. And yeah, her little clutch and makeup stuff just really stood out to me. There was another one a few years back. If I remember correctly, I believe it was by the same builder who had designed the Ship in a Bottle Lego Ideas set, and he built a big wheel. I'm not sure if you guys remember what those are, but they're like little Fisher-Price plastic 3-wheeled like low riding bike sort of thing, and I could not even I couldn't believe how accurate he got that. So yeah, it was quite impressive. So yeah, it's tough because it feels like every year the stakes just keep getting higher and higher, and they're better and better builders. And I'm like, oh gosh, what am I gonna do this time? You know. But yeah, honestly, if we get, if any viewers end up, seeing this stream or the channel, and then are inspired to go to their local Lego convention and put something awesome, that would be the coolest thing ever. So yeah. But in any case, again, I want to thank all you guys for tuning into this live stream, and catch us on Tuesday where we drop the next short, where I'll be putting out another Legend of Zelda build. Until then, again, if you have any questions, you can always send a message to the channel, or let me know if there is a certain build you want to see me try. So thanks again. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you next time. If I can figure out how to end the stream. There we go.